first one because I'm holding the microphone. How about that? So I'll couch this in the answer. It'll be for Alex to begin with. If the answer is, go read this paper, this page on our website or somewhere else, that's fine. I don't imply that my ignorance needs to be eliminated. A short answer on a panel discussion. I understand why landowners are all over the 10-year, the annual. And landowners reason it work out the logic for how that is translated to even a meeting term way sequestration. I'm not for against how that works. So
that's a great question. And unfortunately, there is a paper I'm going to have to send you to. But I will say a couple of things that have helped get my head around is it's all about quantifying the environmental benefit from a carbon storage and sort of loss to, or deferring the loss to, or the creation of emissions through harvesting and whatnot. It's all about quantifying that over a 1-year period, putting it on a 1-year term, and then figuring out if you have those units, those 10-year units that typically you're looking at trying to get 100 of those lined up 1 year at a time. If you can quantify what it means to get 40 of those this year, that can help you start to get to a sense of what needs to happen over a 1-year period in terms of the aggregated climate benefit to have the same sort of ability to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, to reverse United Airlines pulsing carbon into the atmosphere this year. There's a lot of calculus there with the area under the curve, and there's also some other complicated stuff around discount rates. As a society, we probably ought to value higher magnitude of short-term deferrals today, because then we can realize the sort of avoided climate issues that will occur if we don't solve the whole climate change thing sooner. So those are a couple pieces there to chew on, but there is a great paper that's going to do a better job explaining this to me that I can try to circulate to the group, because it's a really critical thing to understand, and we're trying to work on making it easier to understand.
You might have to run that thing around. Yep, I will. And if you could, I guess, pass that the reference to David, and then get that out to the CDN, that'd be great.
And I don't have anybody to direct this to, so whoever wants to take it, feel free. My question was kind of along the lines of the consistencies between the verification protocols of the different registries. So in other words, is a Verra credit equal to a credit from American Carbon Registry?
I will try to take a crack at that one, because the answer is yes and no. And I mean, you can strip it back to even under one registry, there are multiple protocols for different types of practices. They are, a lot of them try to follow the same basic rules that were set forth in the Kyoto Protocol, but how they interpret those is very different. And then there's even differences in the way verifiers interpret things. And I think, as you heard from a couple of us, that landscape is also changing, where a project that would have been verified 10 years ago would not make it through verification today. So, and the other side of that is that certain types of buyers have preferences about what they think is good enough. Like you guys, can you speak a little bit about what Microsoft wanted? It's removals only, right? So maybe, and you might also have you guys buyers perspective.
Yeah, I think the question is sort of around, there's 2 types of offsets: removals, which are removing carbon from the atmosphere, or making atmospheric carbon, putting it into sinks like, terrestrial sinks like forest systems, or avoided emissions, which is sort of, I mean, there are different schools of thought on this. I think the NCX point of view is that we can deliver removals through good forest management, IFM projects. But at the end of the day, when it's about carbon in the atmosphere, both sort of achieving the same thing. But nevertheless, buyers have a preference between the two things. And yeah, Microsoft, who I think folks think of as a leader in the space, and they are a leader in the space. They have a lot of smart minds working on this stuff. They really have a high preference for removals, and they're willing to pay a premium for those removal credits. I think that's a good distinction to make.
Quick question.
Thanks.
So now I feel intimidated. Here in Arkansas, as everyone knows, there's a lot of conversations around how carbon projects and fire will match. I'm just wondering, in discussions with private landowners, is that coming up as part of those discussions?
Almost every time. Thankfully, they're thinking of fire more. And then most ECR, the one exception, fire is perfectly admissible. In the event of a site prep burn where you're burning material, like you did a small cut, if you burn material, they kind of found that in terms of that type of burn. But typically in woods burning or a growing season burn, that kind of thing, are perfectly fine. Landowners are asking about that. They want to keep managing their land.
Yeah, I can chime in quickly. Same answer on the NCX side. I mean, I should have mentioned slides, but really encourage this type of TSI improvement or TSI practices, and they're permitted. We essentially, all we really care about is the carbon stocks at the end of the 1 year monitoring period, and how those have changed or not changed relative to what we thought was going to be there at the 1 year period. So we're trying to be pretty flexible in that regard. And yeah, likewise, we encourage folks to keep up with those good practices.
So Tim, I had a question earlier and I gave me the answer, but I'm pretty slow. So I want to ask you, I'm going to try to ask it a different way. And so when you go to the landowner and they're signing up for 40 years and they sign an agreement and then y'all do your baseline information, y'all go out there and do the assessment. Once that assessment's done, are they locked into a certain price on the carbon credit that day? No. Okay. And the royalty, how's that? I mean, how's that work? I'm interested. As you can't tell.
I got some of you signed right over here. No, actually, they will gain the benefit of an increase in carbon price from the time, let's just make an assumption that we go out and we say, golly, you got 100 tons per acre of carbon that you have to sell at your royalty level, which is spelled out in the agreement. And today that price is $10 or $12. But by the time we get through the process and get it registered and verified, it's 15. When the credits are sold, that's what they get paid for. When the credits are sold, nothing happens till something's sold. Okay. That's the avoided emission credits. That's what's out there being sequestered right now. Okay. As we have to return every 5 years and remeasure. Okay. And we're measuring down to the 10th of an inch. So we're going to account for any growth, hopefully in a 5 year period pretty accurately. My hope is. So the next time let's say we go 5 years and golly, you got a 10% growth. That's extra credits per se that you could grow. Those are sold, and at whatever it is, then it's sold at that price. It's not locked in. The agreement does not say anything but your royalty percentage. It doesn't say a price. And so when credits are sold, you make that royalty on that sale at whatever the price is, up or down.
The first time you're selling is at the baseline of 100.
Whatever. Yes. Addition. Yes. And as you can understand, if you've got a fairly young forest, like Dr. Allen was saying, you're going to hit some more growth later in the curve, later down in the lifespan of that stand. We look at it on a stand or a timber type by timber type basis. So but yes, our hope is we have to come back and remeasure every 5 years. The plots are permanent and you will gain as the years go on to a certain point. Okay.
The initial payment, when the credits are that's, you divide that out in 40 years?
Actually, it's going to be weighted. It's probably going to be closer to 50 to 60% of the total will happen right then. Based on what we've seen so far, yes. That'll in that initial sale or maybe 2 sales, depending on how many you've got. That will be done then. But if you look at that 40-year period, the bulk of that will happen right then, assuming, the age of the stand and all that kind of stuff. So that's, okay. Well, yes, it could be $5 a ton, or you can only have 5 tons, but the price could go to $90 instead of 10. So we don't know 10 years from now what the price per credit is going to be for sure. Sure enough, you're not going to be generating as many credits as the stand ages, okay, or the forest ages. Do you have to sell? Well, credits actually have a lifespan. These buyers, they want a vintage. And if you look on some of these, they actually have a vintage date. So it's not a good idea to hold them for very long. Something, what is it, credibility, or I don't know, maybe they want to say, gosh, these trees are doing this thing right now or last year. Okay. They don't want a 5-year-old credit. Am I saying that right? I mean, I've not sold any personally myself. I've got land that I've got to sell from, but I'll let you know. But to answer your question, yeah, you probably do have to sell. It'd be wise to sell. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. Can you all speak to the rationale of not allowing carbon credit sales on top of compensatory mitigation for wetlands and streams? But also, are you seeing any examples of carbon projects also including species banking in the same location? Species banking.
On the first question, at least from NCX's perspective, that really comes down to the additionality question of understanding what the landowner was either likely already going to do, not do, or maybe they were required to do or not do some contract and financial incentive to do or not do something. So that's our approach there. And the second question is an interesting one, and I should have touched on it on my slides, but there are buyers out there of carbon credits who want to secure their carbon credits with things called co-benefits, which could be related to where the credits are being sourced, who the landowners are that are generating those credits, the other benefits of a harvest deferral program resulting in improved wildlife habitat for a given species. On the other side, there are definitely cases where reducing these layers on stimuli to improve wildlife habitat. So those things sometimes come in conflict, but the co-benefit terminology, I think, is getting to what you're asking about, which is how could you stack those values in a way that maybe result in a higher price per credit or a greater likelihood that the landowner would be a good fit for a program.
I'm not sure if I understand what compensatory banking is, but I have a little experience with private mitigation bank. And depending on how your conservation easement is written, that is allowed. Because I know of one particular that you are allowed to actively manage within the bank, timber resources and all that kind of stuff. So there's no conflict or no exclusion for the property inside the bank to be not considered for a credit sale. Okay, so I guess a lot depends on how that mitigation bank is established.
Most of the registries disallow it, though. That's well, no, because it's not additional is the issue. The registry issue, you would have had to do whatever you did, whether it was manage or establish the bank due to the compensatory action, and therefore it was going to happen without carbon finance. And you can't say if you layer carbon on top of it, that's more carbon coming out of the atmosphere or more carbon staying in the ground. So that's written into most methodologies globally and nationally. And then I don't know very much about species banking, but I will tell you that for our carbon credit portfolio, that's run, I want to be clear, this is run by my colleague Billy Gascoigne, so I'm not the total expert here, but we've had brokers have us sign agreements that say we will not sever benefits. So water quality and species biodiversity benefits will travel with the carbon credits in exchange for selling at a higher price. And those that don't sever the co-benefits sell at a lower price. So there is, and there's a gentleman out of, I think he's out of Stetson University, Royal Gardner, who's written extensively on credit stacking and both the legality and economics of it. And I highly recommend his writing in general on the topic of mitigation and credit stacking. It's like some of the only legal papers I've ever understood when I read them, but I'd point you in the direction of some of that work from like the Royal Gardner. Yeah.
Just like to add to that, because I've had a couple of conversations with some of the nature conservancy folks about mitigation banking. And I don't know if this is gospel, but if you're designing a mitigation bank and ultimately you've got stream credits that you can sell, and then there are forest credits or vegetation credits, something it can be, you can generate revenue from both streams in a mitigation bank. If one of those streams, for example, the reforestation credit, is not part of the mitigation, you're not selling that as part of the mitigation credit, then you're sort of decoupling, you're using that bank to generate stream credits, which could then be sold to a Department of Transportation or something like that. But then you have also planted a bunch of trees that are still eligible to do a carbon project on, and they're not linked, even though they're part of the same property that is in a mitigation bank.
Qualify for streamboard wetland.
Yeah, if you're mitigating an unforested stream mile,
Yeah,
then you have a forested stream. But I've never seen anybody get one of those through verification. It's like a gray area methodology. The registry and that speaks to the question that's asked about the difference between all of these things. A lot of these things come down to like a value judgment by a verifier, and it's hard. Every one of these projects right now is like a child, unique, different, no value judgments on which one is best, but it's hard.
and it's changing rapidly. It's not stabilized. It's even more volatile now than was a few years ago. So that's got a lot of us thinking about opportunities, but still trying to hope for a little bit of stability in the way these things are done. But I wanted to circle back to the idea that stacking. I was talking to somebody else about this earlier, specifically to the geography that we work in the Delta. I think has the potential to be a high value credit if it's done through, one of these, verifiers, because it does have these co-benefits. And if it's particularly marketed to an organization that is in a supply chain, for example, where there's a Cargill or, a company that grows, the rice that they use in their crispy treats here. They're particularly interested in knowing that their investment in carbon credit also was, going to provide water quality, groundwater recharge, habitat, and potentially, provide some additional economic diversity in a landscape that's use a little bit of economic diversity. All of those things, even though they're not strictly monetized like a credit, they still have value, and particular to that company's shareholders. And they're being pressured by their investors to say, we want our company to be, you know, a real true life benefit, you can say that we're not just buying credits because we're interested, we've got offset. It also has all these other co-benefits. That to me is where a lot of the value for this geography lies.
Just bring it back down to a simpler thing. I'm sure you already answered this in your conversation, but it was a lot of information in a short period of time. So like with the 40-year contract, you sign on at X dollars, and then say 15, 20 years in, you come through, do a timber sale and remove a third of the volume. How does that come out on the credits and all that? How does that work out?
Excuse me. If you choose to go the selective harvest route, there are specifics in the agreement about stocking level and what it must remain at or above. So that, yes, you can selectively harvest. And when that initial assessment is done as what your standing volume is at the time, we'll give you estimates about, okay, through the life, this is what you could expect to thin over the life of the contract. So it's spelled out in the agreement. Now, and I used a third. That's just off the top of my head. It works out to be about a third of the standing volume. Yeah, it's pretty plain. We use these plain old Gingrich stocking tables, just like most foresters have seen. So, yeah.
Need it.
Kind of back on some of the verification elements. Do y'all have a perspective on whether or not there are enough third-party verifiers out there? And, okay, I'd be curious to some of the. No, I definitely don't, but I'm just curious if that's an agreement.
My perspective briefly is there's not. There needs to be more. We'd love for some local, there don't seem to be many in Arkansas. If I know of any, if y'all know of any, let me know. But it's a pretty laborious task and can be expensive, but that seems to be a bottleneck. I mean, y'all can agree or?
Yeah, I think I talked to ACR about that at one time, and long story short, they said, for you to become a verifier, expect, a couple of years worth of review, and, it's about 15 grand or something like that, an investment to go through all of the different certifications and trainings and all that kind of stuff. Of course, the upside then, if there's not very many out there, then you've got business, to do. But I think I probably haven't said that enough when we talk about diversified revenue that this can provide. It's not just in carbon credits, but it's a whole ecosystem of jobs that aren't currently well staffed in Arkansas. And I think it could have, it's got the real opportunities in a lot of rural communities that don't have a lot of options.
So in general, who is out that cost for the verifier?
In the case of Native States does. The project proponent or developer does. I guess.
Yeah, same with NCX.
But just to clarify, the carbon developer has to build in those costs.
Yeah,
when
it's a
they're
really
doing
good
their
clarification.
model. So when they're figuring that out, it's not free. It's just part of doing business.
Which that's a little different than what it was back, if I remember correctly, back in the 2003 to 2010 timeframe. Some of those verifiers were independents going around verifying, maybe you remember, and that was the cost to the landowner. That's changed, I think, in this iteration. It's not, there's no cost to the landowner.
One other thing I will say about this, I think collectively this is referred to as like monitoring, reporting, and verification costs. And it's one of the biggest hurdles in this sector. Is not only are there a lot of registries and a lot of methodologies, some sort of require each project to be measured individually, plus every 5 years. NCX is correct me when I get this wrong, is establishing itself in a different space where they can save some of those costs by doing it remotely. So there's a little bit of opportunity to still work on an MRV as an overall per project cost, whether or not something can be done in a landscape and how that, how that's done, I think has yet to be fully fleshed out. And it's probably one of the places that the industry is going to evolve rapidly for a little while until everybody agrees. Yeah, this is definitely the best way to do this. And we can all agree this works.
Opportunity to stand on a soapbox. So I was talking to Alex about this at the break. Throughout all these presentations, it sort of reminded me of fear that I think I'm realizing and seeing the private sector step into the space and develop really great tools. This was brought up with NCX. It's all underpinned by federally funded data. The FIA analysis, federally funded satellite data, TNC, we all rely on major federal programs to underpin these. So I don't want us all to get lost in thinking there's no role for the public sector in this, and some of those programs, as they are continually losing funding, that the private sector relies on that data just as much as the public sector does. I'm going to get on my soapbox and say, for all this to work, we've got to have FIA data. We've got to continue to have all of these programs, and we're watching funding for them disappear. So just there is, in that regard, there's no separation between public and private data. We all need that data. So I'm a scientist. I'm gonna sign off now. I mean, so the concept of aggregation is putting several small projects or parcels together. When you aggregate a buffer pool, it's the same concept. It's just sometimes people will take a fraction of every single one of their, say you have 40 participants in your aggregated project. Sometimes you'll take a slice of all 40. Sometimes you'll set aside 10% of those 40 entire parcels. It's a way of distributing your risk. When you have one landowner, that landowner, you can have much more confidence in how they're going to behave and their communication with you about that behavior. The more you aggregate, the more variability you have until NCX learns how to read people's minds. But that's, I don't know if anyone else had a aggregated buffer pool.